Hello, Jacksonites. Welcome to my re-review of the controversial, and you're going to be shitting yourself when you hear about what my new thoughts on this film are. Sequel to one of my favorite horror movies of all time, one that garnered a lot of respect for the horror movie franchise when it came out, and a lot of people just like to pretend that the sequel, unfortunately, does not exist, but it does, and that is, of course, Sinister 2. Yeah, Sinister 2. Um, so Sinister 2 is an interesting film because, like I said, yes, a lot of people that I've seen review this movie, they bash the shit out of it. They unapologetically bash the shit out of it, and part of me understands why people bash it because, well, let me get to that in just a second. They bash the shit out of it for no reason. I understand why people do it. However, I kind of choose to ignore it. And small part of me sort of doesn't understand why they bash the shit out of it because, in my opinion, this film has good things going for it. So let me get something out of the way. Whereas many other people bash the shit out of this movie, I don't. I actually think this is a pretty solid sequel to a very solid horror film. Having said that, this is a flawed film. Don't get me wrong. This is a very flawed film. It's very obvious that the studio saw how successful the original Sinister was, and they're thinking sequel, of course. And this movie was rushed into theaters. Or not really rushed. Well, even though this film did come out 3 years after the first Sinister came out in 2012. Sinister 2 came out in 2015. This movie definitely does suffer from sequelitis, very much so. It's very obvious due to the fact that this film opens in an identical style to the first movie, whereas the first movie started with a Super 8 snuff film of the family being hung. This movie also does start with a snuff film of someone being hung up like scarecrows, being burned alive. But I still do like this movie a lot more than most people do. I think there's a lot of good things that go into it, and there's still a lot of potential for further Sinister sequels. However, this movie didn't do so well. The first Sinister film had a budget of $3 million, and it made $87.7 million in its box office, which is quite the return investment. However, Sinister 2 had a budget of $10 million, and it unfortunately only made $54.1 million, which, granted, that still is a decent return investment. It still was not as successful as the first film, unfortunately. So let's get into the plot of Sinister 2. The film, like I said, the film opens in an identical style to the first film, which shows the Super 8mm short film of a family being strung up like scarecrows in the middle of a cornfield, and they are burned alive. This is actually a nightmare of 9-year-old Dylan Collins. Let's see, he is played by Robert Daniel Sloan. Who is staying in a rural farmhouse next to a Lutheran church, a run-down, no longer in use Lutheran church, with his twin brother Zach, played by D'Artagnan Sloane, brother of Robert Daniel Sloane? D'Artagnan Sloane, who went on to play one of the kids in the 2017 It film. He plays the jokester, the one with the glasses. And also their mother, Courtney, played by Shannon Sossamon. I think that's her name. Deputy So-and-so from the original Sinister is researching all the murders connected to the being Bagul, and burning down houses where each murder took place before another family can move into them, trying to break the cycle of Bagul's killing spree. Including the house where the main character from the previous film, Ellison Oswalt, and his family were murdered in the original Sinister. Each night, Dylan is visited by a group of ghostly kids, led by a boy whose name is Milo, who coerces him to watch the whole movies of this film, of families being murdered in various really nasty ways. Being eaten alive by alligators, being electrocuted in a watery kitchen, buried alive under snow on Christmas Day, being strapped to chairs and their mouths forced open to have their teeth mutilated with dentist drills, and the last one having their guts torn into by rats. I'll get to that when I talk about the kills. Deputy So-and-so arrives at Courtney's farmhouse to destroy it. However, he discovers that Courtney and her two kids are living there. And he tells Courtney that he is a private investigator, and to which she allows him to investigate the church on the property where the rat chewing through the guts murder took place. Deputy So-and-so later stumbles across an article that shows Courtney and her asshole abusive ex-husband named Clint on their wedding day. And suddenly articles about the church murder, they start to appear all over the screen before the deputy sees Bagul walking towards him in his laptop, and then he just proceeds to slam it closed. Anyway, the next day, Clint shows up at the farmhouse with police to try to take the boys away from Courtney. However, Deputy So-and-so shows up there, and he threatens the state troopers that Clint brought along with him and warns them that they need a court order in order to take the kids away, which is probably my favorite scene in the film, because Deputy So-and-so does such a great job of playing this like sneaky little bastard who likes to point out the obvious. And the scene itself, it's really funny. Every time I watch it afterwards, it just has me like snickering my ass off. And also in this scene, it's also revealed that Deputy So-and-so was arrested as a suspect for the murder of the Oswalts. And while he was cleared of charges, my guess is probably due to inconclusive evidence or just none to begin with. He was fired for releasing classified information behind his boss's back to Ellison Oswalt. When Clint and the state troopers leave, Courtney wants to leave with the boys, but Deputy So-and-so advises her not to, knowing that each of the murders connected to Bagul occurred only after the families fled the homes where previous murders had been initiated. Courtney invites him to stay, and the two develop kind of a romance, but it's a romance. Though thankfully, I at least in my opinion, I don't think it's forced, though it does come out a little too fast. Deputy So-and-so meets with a professor who is like a local colleague of Professor Jonas from the previous film, who has come into possession of a ham radio, which belonged to Professor Jonas. He unfortunately has disappeared. it's never really stated what happens to him. He's mentioned in one scene, and that's it. The professor said the ham radio once belonged to a family in Norway who was murdered in 1973. And he plays a recording on his laptop of a young girl whose voice on the tapes it screams in Norwegian, "Quiet, Mom, Bagul can't hear me over your screaming." And Deputy So-and-so deduces that Bagul specifically targets the kids of murdered families, and he orders the professor to destroy the radio. Then he realizes that he must get back to the farmhouse where Courtney's at. Unfortunately, Zach becomes jealous of the ghost kids who visit Dylan, and he wants their attention for some fucking reason. God, Zach's a little bastard. They show Dylan the video of the church murders, and after Dylan refuses to watch the last snuff film, the kids turn their attention to Zach, and they kick Dylan to the side. Clint arrives the next day with a court order, and sadly, Courtney is forced to leave the house with Zach and Dylan. Deputy So-and-so arrives at Clint's danger. However, Clint butts him in the face with a shotgun and kicks his ass and tells him, "Get the fuck out of here or I'll shoot you." And the next day, Zach, being directed by the Ghost Kids, films Dylan and his family. And after realizing he and his family have been drugged with the same stuff, with the same glow stick fluid that they used in the first film, Dylan contacts Deputy So-and-so for help before he falls unconscious. Courtney, Dylan, and Clint are drugged and strung up on scarecrow posts out in the middle of a cornfield with burlap sacks over their faces, and a possessed Zach sets Clint on fire and films him as he burns to a cinder. And just as Zach is about to light Dylan on fire, Deputy So-and-so shows up and hits Zach with his car, sending him flying, which would have killed him, but he's not killed. He frees Courtney and Dylan, and they flee into the cornfield. Okay. That explains it. However, Zach, having survived thanks to his demonic possession, explains it here in the film, or not in the film, but in the article. Hang on a second, I gotta look something up. Okay. So anyway, thanks to his demonic possession, Zach chases them into the cornfield, and he cuts off Deputy So-and-so's hand with a sickle, leaving only like his 2 fingers left on his hand. And inside their home, the Ghost Kids try to help Zach find his mom and brother, and just as he's about to kill the two, Deputy So-and-so manages to show up with a stick or something and smack the Super 8 camera out of Zach's hand, which causes it to shatter on the ground, ruining Zach's whole movie and breaking the cycle of Bagul's massacre. and Zach is shamed by the ghost kids for failing to kill the rest of his family. And Bagul shows up, places his hand on Zach's shoulder, and he starts to decay and turn into a skeleton. The house catches fire as Deputy So-and-so, Dylan, and Courtney escape the flame. And later, Deputy So-and-so returns to his motel room, and he finds the ham radio, and over it, as a young girl's voice whispers, "Deputy." Bagul shows up in the same exact jump scare as the end of the film, end of the first film, and the screen cuts to black. Why? So Sinister 2... like I said at the beginning, Sinister 2 is kind of a unique specimen. In the fact that, well, yes, it suffers from a lot of problems. Yes, it suffers from sequelitis. Yes, it is an inferior film to the first movie. I kind of can't help but kind of almost be like how I am towards Godzilla Raids Again towards this film. And what I mean by that is I actually really do like this movie. I really enjoy watching it. In some ways, I think I enjoy it just a little more than the first movie. Not in every single way. And the first movie is far superior to this movie. Don't get me wrong. But I can't help but like this movie a lot more than most people do. I think this is a very underrated sequel. I just think it's a very underrated horror film in general. And like I said, while yes, it does have a lot of problems, I still do think that there's a lot of good things that go into this movie that make it definitely worth a watch. So, unlike with the first Sinister film, where I just listed off the same pros and cons from the first film, or from my original review, which I still need to delete, I actually had to kind of remake my pros and cons for my re-review of Sinister 2. However, a lot of them are very similar, but once again, I will elaborate on them further once I get around to doing them. So, the first pro, going into the pros, pro number one is that the main characters, specifically Deputy So-and-so, Courtney, and Dylan, in my opinion, they're all great. Especially Deputy So-and-so. He's played by the same actor. He's played by James Ransone. I think or Ransone. I apologize for not if I butchered that name. I apologize. Excuse me. But the three main characters in this film, I think they're all great. James Ransone as Deputy So-and-so, he is fantastic in this movie. He's probably the strongest thing about this movie. I always love it when movies do a great job, especially in usually in a franchise. In a franchise, when they take a minor character, like he was featured in the first movie, he was only given 1 or 2 scenes, but in this following sequel or sequels, they expand on that minor character, and you find out that there is a whole nother level to this guy. Or girl, depending on the character. And in Sinister 2, I think it's one of the strongest examples of a sequel expanding upon a minor character from the first film. Because Deputy So-and-so didn't really have that much screen time in the first movie, which did make sense because it wasn't his film. He was in maybe 4 scenes, I think at least 4. And he was good there too. But here, he's just beyond fucking fantastic. We expand on his personality, we expand on his intellect, we expand on his sense of humor. We expand so much of Deputy So-and-so in this movie. In my opinion, it's the reason. Deputy So-and-so is the reason why you watch this movie. He is so goddamn good. Thankfully, this movie did have the same writer as the first. Let's see. It did have the same writers as the first Sinister. Hang on a second. The first Sinister was written by C. Robert Cargill and Scott Derrickson. First one was directed by Scott Derrickson. Sinister 2 had a different director, Styrian Foy. However, it was still written by C. Robert Cargill and Scott Derrickson. So it had the same writers. And whereas the same writers, they were able to expand upon Ellison Oswald's character in the first movie, they do a fantastic job expanding on Deputy So-and-so's character in Sinister 2, in my opinion. Because like I said, he is the reason you watch this movie. He is so fucking good. Like I said, and my favorite scene in the movie is when Deputy So-and-so confronts Clint and the state troopers. He just, without, raising his voice, without making any threatening physical gestures, he makes them quake in their boots just by pointing out obvious facts. Because Clint is one, the ex-husband, the abusive father. Clint is one of those assholes who thinks that just because he has a giant business, that thinks because he has so many people working for him, he's friends with all the cops, that he can just do whatever he wants. I hate those type of guys. I absolutely hate them. But he's one of those assholes who thinks he can do anything and just get away with it. And seeing Deputy So-and-so not put Clint in his place, but the state troopers who think they can do whatever they want just because they're friends with a man with high power. Watching him put these state troopers in their place and watching them quake in their boots, it's hilarious. It is absolutely hilarious. You have to watch this movie because of Deputy So-and-so. He is so awesome. Pro number 2. Oh, yeah, the other characters. Let's see. Shannon Sossamon as Courtney. She does a really good job, too. Even though she's not, well, I guess she kind of is, but, and this is a part of the problem where, when I get into the Sinister 2 syndrome, she doesn't really have anything to do with the main story, per se. Like, she has nothing to do with, sorry. She has nothing to do with what's going on with, Dylan and Zach and the ghoul stuff. She's kind of thrust into it at the last minute, and she just kind of seems like, yeah, okay, this was going on the whole time, and I knew that, which is bullshit. But Shannon does a really good job as Courtney. You get the sense that Dylan and Zach are actually her sons. I'm pretty sure they're not, but she feels very natural as being a mom to these two. She's very natural as being a protective mom who's just looking out for her kids against an abusive asshole father. And just in general, also her chemistry with Deputy So-and-so is really, really good. I still do think that their romance is not really forced per se. It does go a little fast. Like, it kind of seems like it. Oh yeah, they have feelings for each other. But it's like they find companionship and they find safetyness in each other when they meet up, and that develops and it takes hold very quickly, which I do like. They just seem like a natural couple, which I also do like. And also Robert Daniel Sloan as Dylan. He's the only child actor in this film who is actually good. D'Artagnan Sloan as Zach Collins, he's not bad either. He's just kind of annoyingly over the top. But Robert Daniel Sloan as Dylan Collins, he does a pretty decent job with the character. His facial expressions aren't that good. He kind of has the same blank, borderline, I hate to say this, autistic look on his face. But he still does a good job. He seems like he's more intelligent for his age. I think these two are like maybe 8 or 9 years old. Hang on just a second. Nope. Anyway, but yeah, Robert Daniel Sloan as Dylan. He does a good job. He's got good dialogue. He's not annoying in any way, shape, or form. Though a lot of times he just plays a very scared boy, which does make sense as he's traumatized because of his father being an abusive douchebag. But he does a good job. And I guess I could say D'Artagnan Sloan as Zach. He does decent, but like I said, he's just annoyingly over the top. And not in a good way, obviously. Pro number two is that I think the pacing overall for the film is very good, despite what Jeremy Johns says. I feel like the pace, it's not a slow burn. It's really not. There's a couple moments that do kind of flow at a slower pace, but it's not like the slow pace from the first film. It is definitely more of a quicker paced film. I was never bored watching the film. Some other people may have been bored. I never was. I thought the pacing of the movie was very solid. I never felt like any scenes dragged. I felt like every scene flowed into each other at a natural progression. Overall, I just think it was really, really, really solidly paced. Pro number three is that, well, yes, the ending is pretty much just a big homage to Children of the Corn. I think the ending to the film is overall kind of fun. It's kind of got that possession / poltergeist / haunted house feel that is kind of eerie. And watching Courtney and Dylan hide from the ghost kids and from their possessed brother, for me at least, it's kind of fun. And also watching Deputy So-and-so kind of get tossed around a little bit because these ghost kids, I think it's a fun ending. The very ending of the movie with the babool jump scare, I'll elaborate on that later. That's not good, but from the scene where we first see the three in the cornfield tied up like scarecrows till when Dylan is killed by Bagul, I think that's a very overall fun scene. Pro number four is that when the film is trying to be scary, I feel like the film has a very overall good, eerie tone to it. Like you still kind of feel like you're being watched, even though it's very, very toned down from the first film. I still feel like at times you feel like you're being watched. You feel like no matter what you do, you're kind of stuck in a hopeless, helpless situation. Eye itches. It just overall the tone for this movie, like I said, it is toned down quite a bit from the first film. But still, I think it's overall very solid. It feels like the first movie. And if you want to watch a movie where you're not going to have the shit scared out of you, but you do want to be kind of creeped out, and you want to have the sensation of if you look at a shadow or some shit, you may see something moving. This movie's got it good for you because I think, like I said, overall, I think the eerie tone for this movie is pretty good. Damn, my eye itches. The next pro number 5 is that, contrary to popular belief, I actually think the Super 8 kills in this movie, in some ways, I think they're a little better than the first film. They're a lot more creative. They're a lot more violent. Even though I praise the first film for the Super 8 kills not really showing any of the violence, they just left it up to your imagination, which is great there too, don't get me wrong. However, I just kind of feel like it's a little more satisfying when you actually get to see some of the shit that happens. And in this movie, you see a lot more of the Super 8 kills. God damn it. Eye itches. Hang on a second, guys. So yeah, like I said, the Super 8 kills. The first Super 8 kill involves 4 people being hung upside down in a tree branch over a swamp, and their heads are chomped off by CGI alligators. I'll get to that when I get to the cons. The second one is 3 people being strung up and being dropped into a kitchen that's got like maybe 8 inches of water on the ground, and somebody one of the kids tosses a live electrical wire into the water, and they are proceeded to be fried to a crisp because water conducts electricity. Buried alive in graves of snow. 4 people are buried alive in snow Christmas Eve. Though the worst one is definitely when I think it's like 3 people are strapped to dentist chairs and their mouths are mutilated by dentist drills. That's probably the worst. But definitely the most gruesome is the church murder. Now, the church murder it's an ancient form of medieval torture. 5 people are nailed like Jesus into the floor. They have nails driven through their hands. Their legs are strapped down with chains. They have sacks put over their heads, and they have a rat get on their stomach, and they have a metal bowl strapped over their stomachs. And then hot coals are placed on top of the metal bowls, and the intense heat from the conduction of the metal heating up, the rats start to freak out, and since they got nowhere to go because the bowl is strapped down, they proceed to eat their way through the victim's stomach in order to burrow their way out through the victim's gut, which is a pretty fucking gruesome ass way to die. And it's probably the most violent kill in the film. That's probably, like I said, that it's the most violent, and I think that's the best kill in the film, or set of kills. It's the best. It's the best Super 8 film. And overall, I just think the Super 8 kills, they're a lot more creative. They're a lot more violent. You get to see a lot more of them. While again, yes, less is more with the first film. If they tried that again here, I feel like it would have been. I feel like this movie would have been hated on a little more than it is already. So I'm glad they actually showed a lot more with the Super 8 kills. I'm glad they're a lot more violent. And the last pro that I have here is that the murder mystery elements in the film, they still are very engaging. Even though they pretty much are kind of rehashing a lot of stuff that we knew about in the first film, I kind of feel like it was just insinuated in the first movie. Well, or heavily implied. Here, it feels like it's more confirmed for, like, it's a for sure type thing. Even though the murder mystery elements are kind of small, really the biggest scene that it shows up is when Deputy So-and-so meets up with the professor with the ham radio. That scene is probably my second favorite in the entire film, aside from when Deputy So-and-so confronts the state troopers. I really like that scene because it totally sucks you in, and makes that type of murder mystery stuff from the first movie is back, and it sucks you in just like it did in the first film. So with all the good stuff said about this movie, oh boy. Let's get into the cons. The first con, there's a lot of cons for this film. The first con is that Bagul has absolutely no presence in this film. You see a lot more of him, and that's the main reason why he has no presence, because like with the first film, less is more. You didn't really see that much of Bagul. When you did, you never really got a whole shot of his entire body. Here, you get multiple shots of his entire body, and he just has no presence. He's not scary. He's not intimidating. He isn't. He just has no scary presence whatsoever. He just feels like generic horror movie bad guy at this point, unfortunately, which is a huge detriment to the film. So that's con number one, is that Bagul has no presence whatsoever. This leads into the kids, the ghost kids. They're not scary. Granted, I wasn't scared of them in the first film, but I still felt I still felt a sense of threat from the kids in the first film. Because once again, you didn't see them that much. In fact, there's really only like 3 scenes in the first movie where you didn't see them. Here, they're almost like main characters in this film. So you're not really scared of them because you see them so much. And also, they speak. That's one thing that I found just a little unnerving about the kids from the first film, is that they didn't speak. Here, they speak all the time. Granted, that makes sense because they're talking to another kid, but it just takes all the presence away from the kids. Con number 3 is that the acting for the kids sucks. Oh my god. The child actors playing the ghost kids are atrocious. Utterly atrocious. They all have these like over-the-top, cute and innocent, but also evil and devious expressions on their faces. And they speak in these fake, innocent, but also devious like tones in their voice. And it's so... I'm going to quote Jeremy Jahns on this. Their acting is this type of bad. Because someone erased it from the archive memory. It's that bad. It's Star Wars prequel era levels of bad. Oh god, the kid acting is just terrible. And that leads me into another thing that I said about when I was in my pro section. The scares in this movie are massively toned down from the first movie. There's a lot of jump scares that just... they make you jump, sure, but they don't scare you. They don't legitimately scare you. Unlike the jump scares in the first movie, which left a lasting impression on you because not only did they make you jump, but they also made you realize, oh shit, this situation's fucked. What's he gonna do? Here, they just jump scare you out of nowhere just to make you jump. That's it. Now, I don't mind jump scares. I really don't. I do like jump scares, but I like good jump scares. Here, they're like Paranormal Activity 4 levels of jump scares. They're just something jumps out of nowhere and just to make you jump, and that's it. It doesn't leave a lasting impression on you, so it just makes you feel like, what the fuck was that for? But overall, there's no tension. There's no genuine feeling of fear like there was in the first film. There's no sense of anxiety from the first film. Just the scares are massively, massively, massively toned down in this film. And like I said, granted that the film's eerie tone is effective, but it's not going to make you like legitimately afraid to go to bed like the first movie is. This movie has... it's just standard horror movie cliche jump scares at this point, unfortunately. Next con is, let's see, 1, 2, 3. Con number 5 is that the CGI in this movie is terrible. They use CGI for the alligators when they're biting the people's heads off. The electrical burns on the people in the kitchen, they're CG and they look terrible. Absolutely terrible. The rats in the medieval church murder, they're CG, which granted that doesn't make sense because you obviously don't want to perform that type of stuff on rats because the filmmakers would have PETA up their asses and out their mouths if they actually did that to rats. But still, it's very obvious that the rats are CG, so I think they could have done a little better. And this is Super 8mm footage. This isn't exactly 1080p type quality, but even then I could still tell that the rats were CG. And the blood was CG too. When the rats burrowed out of people's stomachs and the blood was just pouring out of their wounds, it's very obvious that the blood was CG and it just looked like Jello. Now, that's my issue with CG blood, is that it always looks like Jello. Let's see, is there any other CG? Nah, I think that's about it. But overall, and also the CG that they use for the kids' decaying faces, that looks like shit. And whereas not like in the first movie where it looked slightly cartoony, but because it was shot in the shadows a lot, it kind of hid the fakeness of it. Here, the kids are shot playing out in the open, and they still look cartoony, like almost cringeworthy cartoony. And when Zack is turned into a skeleton because of Bagul, it's a very, very cartoony CGI effect, and it just looks like crap. The CGI in this movie is just terrible. Let's see. Con number 6 is that the music score for this movie is very inferior. Whereas the first Sinister film, the music was done by Christopher Young, Sinister 2's music was done by Toman Dandy. Never heard of him. It is a for the most part, it is a new score for the film, using only a couple. Actually, I think there's only one track from the first movie that's reused in this movie. The score overall just feels like generic horror movie music. It's not bad per se, but it is inferior to the first Sinister film, and also the snuff film music soundtracks are almost bad. They're just generic at this point. They're not scary. They're not eerie. They're just bland. They're just bland. They're bland horror movie scores. And overall, this movie does have a bland score. I hate to say that. But yeah, the score for this film it's a big downgrade. It's not scary. It's not tense. It doesn't add itself to the scenes when it's supposed to be scary. It just overall is a very inferior score to the first film. Again, it's not bad. If it was in a different movie, it would have been a little better. But for this movie, it just doesn't work. And the last con that I have for Sinister 2, this is where I coined the phrase Sinister 2 syndrome. And the fact that this movie feels like two different movies going on at the same time, and at the very end, the two are meshed together. And more often than not, when they're meshed together, it's not the greatest execution. Because on one hand, you have a sequel to Sinister, and then on the other hand, you have a mother trying to keep her kids away from an abusive asshole father. And at the very end, the two are just smushed together, and it just kind of becomes a bit of a mess. Despite me thinking that the end final scene of this movie is fun, I definitely still do agree that it is a little messy because it's implied that Courtney knows absolutely nothing about what's going on with Dylan, Zach, and the ghost kids. She's so focused on herself and her situation with her ex that she just doesn't give two shits about her two kids. So it really does feel like there's two different movies going on at the same time, and this is, of course, where I coined the phrase Sinister 2 syndrome. Because it just feels like there's two movies going on, and it just doesn't work. It really does not work, unfortunately. So with all that said about Sinister 2, despite this movie being a very flawed film, it's a very flawed sequel, I still do like it. I really do like it. I think it's a very underrated film. It's got a lot of really good things going for it. Yes, it is a flawed film. I'll stress it again and again and again. Just like with Godzilla Raids Again is an inferior film. Granted, I don't like this movie as much as Godzilla Raids Again, but I still do think if you are a fan of the first film, I definitely do recommend you watch Sinister 2. It's a decent sequel. It's a good follow-up. I still do wish they would make a third film. It's unlikely, unfortunately, but if they do, I'll be ecstatic. So Sinister 2, I'm going to rate a 7 out of 10. Last time I think I gave it a 5, so that should probably put things into perspective on how much my opinion on this movie has increased. So, decent sequel. If you want to check it out, please do. I think it's a decent follow-up to the first film. So with all that said, Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. Look forward to the next video. It's not going to be tomorrow, unfortunately. And I actually don't think I'm going to be posting a video Sunday or Monday either, because Monday is my birthday and tomorrow I'm going out to dinner with my family. So I'll have my review of Lethal Weapon 2 out maybe Wednesday. So look forward to that. If I have it out earlier, that's great. But if I don't, you're just going to have to wait and see until then. So push the comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. And as always, I will see you in the next one. Don't move into a fucking house and let your 2 kids be little bastards and kill you when your asshole ex-husband comes to take them away. And I'll see you in the next one.